Hi, I'm Vinny Eastwood. I'm the Legalise Cannabis Party's Joint Chief of Web and Social Media. And today with me we have Shane Brun of MCANZ, the Medical Cannabis Association of New Zealand. Do I have that correct, Shane?
Awareness.
Awareness. And that touches on a very important point, one that we've actually touched on a number of times in the previous 8 episodes of the All Caps podcast, which is raising awareness, actually allowing people to have access to the information is probably one of the most important things, especially leading up to the referendum, where you would hope that people would be coming to make an informed choice about the things that they're doing. So I just wanted to get your take on why you started MCANZ.
Well, I started MCANZ because a lot of the advocacy that I saw, or more activism, I didn't feel was very constructive under a national-led government. So my personal experience was, I was born and bred a fairly conservative person, and I joined the army, and all the dropouts were kicked out of the army for drug use. But when my wife injured her back after 5 years of the runaround with some pretty hard drugs, we got desperate and we tried cannabis, and it worked. So from there it kind of snowballed, and I started to get interested in medical cannabis, and I sort of danced around for a small portion of time with Green Cross, as that was in its dying days. We had an abortive attempt of a registered charity in 2015 with United in Compassion, and out of that I got more confidence to lead from the front myself.
Mm. Now, do you think that taking that leadership role was something you sort of volunteered for, or do you believe it was sort of obligated?
Well, I didn't want to lead initially, and that's why I helped someone else try and start a charity in 2015. But certainly when we just restarted after that rigmarole, I just took it upon myself to be a bit directive and almost like a mini dictatorship, much like what I was used to in the army. And I had a vision, and I had people who had helped me enact that vision and supported me, and it snowballed from there.
Well, what have you been up to then?
Well, the main part of our thrust has been actually trying to get alternative products in that are more affordable. So we had some early success with Tilray, but due to reasons outside of our control, we did have another product range called Cannamid lined up. And we actually had a patient approved for a high THC oil, and patients approved for a 20-to-1 oil, which was as a high CBD, which would have been much more effective for the epileptic kids. But due to circumstances outside our control, those approvals lapsed and the import fell over when the company got taken over by Aurora. So at the moment, I'm still working on some alternative products that'll be much more affordable that we should hear about in the next 3 or 4 months. In addition to that, this year has all been about the political narrative, I guess.
Explain.
Well, as a charity, political lobbying is allowed, but not as your main effort. But due to reasons, with the politics this year, a lot of it's been about education and just trying to broach the topic in a more constructive manner with some of the key politicians. But we haven't had any luck with David Clark. He's just aloof and unwilling to meet with anyone on the issue.
Mm. Sorry, David Clark. I'm totally out of the loop on politics. I've been so busy with lots of other projects.
So David Clark's the Minister of Health, and it's his bill that is currently going to the second reading in the next month or two. And basically, Labor promised to legalise medical cannabis in 100 days, but due to being a shit opposition, they had no funding to have a policy team. So they made this big promise with no vision of how they would like to see it happen. So they wrote a bill that essentially says, trust us, the Ministry of Health will sort it. No detail, no consultation with the Drug Foundation or us or Normal or any external consultation at all. And we're now going into the second reading, and due to the understaffing and the lack of knowledge of the Ministry of Health and how slow they work on other things due to the resourcing issues, there's not much faith that they'll get things done in the time they have.
Is there a way that we can get the public aware of that particular mechanism. I mean, essentially, a lot of the failure of government extends to the failure of the public to hold the government to account, the failure of the public to recognise what can and can't be trusted when it comes to the words of government. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to 90-ish years of prohibition in New Zealand, there hasn't been an awful lot of honesty on the part of government with regards to cannabis. And I don't think that they're going to honestly try and regulate it to such a degree that's going to be best for the people. In fact, I think it'd probably be best for their political donors or lobbyists or whoever's got their fingers in the pie there kind of thing that stands to benefit and make, potentially millions, if not billions of dollars off of a new cannabis market.
Well, I don't think the donors will be that involved or any of that sort of palaver, because if that was the case, then the regulatory team would already have set up some guidelines to regulations that would be quite positive about supporting an industry. There's a lot of little things that Australia have done that are really bad. For example, in Australia, under their regulations, all of the cannabis has to be lawfully supplied, which means that all of the seed stocks for the growers. So that basically means that the Australian companies are stuck paying royalties to the Dutch or the Canadians forever for their seeds. And a single stroke of the pen over here would mean that we could get it off the local dealer and then bring that into the light, so to speak. And then he might get a cash payout for his genetics, but then the company's not stuck paying 10% royalties to some foreigners forever. So there's all these little things that the industry would really need, and we're not seeing that happening. So I don't think there's any big influence behind the scenes. It's the literal fact that the people in charge of the regulatory team at the Ministry of Health, they either don't know much about it or it's only a small part of their job. And then on top of that, David Clark knew bugger all, and his party knew bugger all, and they had no vision when they put their bill forward.
Is it a matter of cowardice? I saw a video just last night. The title of the video was "Facts Won't Convince People," and you know this to be true because no matter how many facts you give to these regulatory bodies, they don't seem to sink in. And what the video suggested is that in terms of argumentative method is that you change the playing field a bit. Instead of arguing about the thing that you know that they disagree with, you know they're trepidatious about, what you do is you argue the points that you already know that they agree with, that you already know that they're receptive to. Now, in terms of government, what are they really receptive to? They're receptive to giving subsidies for major pharmaceutical companies. They allow them to manufacture their drugs here, advertise their drugs directly to the public, things of that nature. And goodness knows why they did that. I'm sure there's no financial incentive in it whatsoever. No money in politics? No.
Well, our advertising, although I think it's only us in the United States that allow advertising of medicines, but ours is pretty tame. There's no advertising for controlled drugs, and it's pretty rubbish ads on TV about a different version of paracetamol, so it's not really a big deal. But on that advertising front and the regulatory issue, the one thing we do have is that Pharmac can only fund medicines that have a significant body of research to justify funding it. So a product like Sativex, they must have sunk $100 million into research to prove that it's good for MS, which basically means they've now have to recoup that cost, so the price is astronomical. So it's no longer cost effective for Pharmac to fund. At the other end of the scale in Canada, they'll make a virtually identical product, of chemical composition, but with not a jot of research behind it. You and I and the doctors know it should do roughly the same job, but under the laws that are written about how Pharmac funds things, they can never fund a product that doesn't have any research behind it. So damned if we do, damned if we don't. If we do the research and go down the pharmaceutical model, Pharmac won't fund it because it's too expensive. And if we don't do the research and make a cheap product, it still won't be cheap enough for sickness bennies, and there'll be no funding pathway.
It sounds like a convenient excuse for somebody who doesn't really want any meaningful legislative change and wants things to sort of remain the same. And ultimately, that is the purpose of government, is to keep things the same, more or less. So changes like this, something that's so central to, in many cases, people's daily life and absolutely necessary for it in some other cases, then that's a huge change in the public consciousness, and that's not going to happen, I don't think, unless the government really sees the light and becomes a part of that changing consciousness on the issue.
Yeah, well, that's where things get messy. The instinctive reaction is to hate National for 9 years of doing nothing, but all it took is the removal of a few fuddy-duddies near the top and a decent whack of submissions during the submissions phase for the government bill, and we've actually got a really good bit of legislation with a vision of how things could work under a national-led government, and that is a card scheme. But it's a card scheme that's not tied to the dispensaries with the long-haired hippies like they have in California. You get a card whether your doctor likes it or not, based on a set of criteria, and you'd actually go to your pharmacist, and the pharmacy might have a little corner of the shop that's behind a curtain, much like the old adult videos in the video store, and you'd go behind the curtain and talk about what products you want and what you need for your arthritis or whatever, and your pharmacist would be the dispensing medical professional. So that's like a really good vision of how things would work, but it's too little too late. They've been in opposition for 9 months now. And the only reason they did that, allegedly, is because David Clark wouldn't move an inch on getting some oversight for the Ministry of Health's regime, because the government bill as it stands is a blank cheque for David Clark and the Ministry of Health to do what they want, with no oversight from the rest of Parliament.
No oversight?
No. As a regulation, it would only need David Clark's sign-off. So there's no going back to Parliament and having everyone scrutinise it.
So he's essentially becoming the cannabis dictator of New Zealand.
Well, yeah, there's pros and cons to that, because of course Labour's in the middle, and you've got the Greens and their evidence-based post-Portugal policies, and then you've got New Zealand First, who would be in the 1950s at best. So David Clark and Labour actually have to play referee to two very different views on drug policy.
I think one of the points that was raised in that video that I watched last night is that when people who actually have a technical background are in charge, things move remarkably quickly, because the decision-making process isn't based on emotion or based on perception. It's based on who is correct. Who is correct? Is this the fact here? Okay, it is. We all agree on that. We've got objective evidence. Let's move forward on it. And I believe that the objective evidence is that cannabis hasn't killed anybody in 10,000 years. And I believe if you're trying to test a drug for its safety, 10,000 years of research with not one death in untold clinical trials seems...
Yeah. It's a little bit over the top, because there are some risks, but they're so overhyped and they're actually so benign compared to regular drugs. Like the risks of schizophrenia, making it worse and stuff, at the population level, it's so infinitesimally small. And that those facts and figures are clouded by the fact that data comes out of Europe, where people mix tobacco with their cannabis. And tobacco in and of itself also triggers psychosis. So those numbers are murky and at such an extreme end of the scale compared to the likes of high-dose steroids like prednisone. They have adverse mental health events in like 20% of patients. They get manic and, bounce off the walls and up and down and all of that sort of thing. But at the other end, the research is just, it's actually there at the preclinical stage. You could say there's no good phase 3s for pain, but, there'll be dozens of phase 2s, and they're all pointing in the same direction, and that is that the hippies were right all along. So that's where I'm trying to sort of be piggy in the middle and try and bridge that gap a little bit more. But the biggest barrier at the moment under the current scheme is not actually the regulators or the politicians, but some of the medical prescribers, such as the Faculty of Pain Medicine. They're probably the biggest barrier to legal access at the moment in this country.
Well, how so?
Their stance is that there's no evidence for cannabis in chronic pain, neuropathic or otherwise. And even for Sativex, which has good phase 3s for spasticity, they use terms like maybe. So even when a drug company does do the phase 3s and sinks $1 billion into it, the Faculty of Pain Medicine still doesn't want to accept that it works. So for chronic pain patients, which is the leading adult use for medical purposes, they have to go doctor shopping in New Zealand to get a supportive musculoskeletal specialist or a rheumatologist or something like that. You can't get a cannabis product out of Burwood Pain Clinic or Tarts in Auckland or anything like that.
And as a result, we now have a black market because essentially if the law doesn't provide for people in the way that they need in order to live their daily life, they will turn to criminal activity, non-violent, non-damaging criminal activity at that most of the time in order to get the things that they need/want. Now, it's also turned out that, I think in a British study, they reported that a lot of the things that we believe people are doing when they're using it, quote-unquote, recreationally, a study found that, in fact, most of those recreational users were likely to have an undiagnosed medical condition that the cannabis was helping.
Yeah, I've got anecdotes around that sort of thing. I don't buy into the all use is medicinal. You know, I don't have any medical conditions apart from a pretty high BMI. So me using it on a Friday night is not the same as the likes of my wife or any other chronic pain or MS sufferer. But I am aware of one case where a woman went undiagnosed with MS for much longer than she should have. And she had become a heavy cannabis user. And in truth, it was masking her pain and spasticity the whole time. So by the time she got diagnosed, they actually went and looked back at her previous scans, one after a car crash, and they had just saw the faintest glimmer of MS showing in her MRI from earlier. So she'd sort of staved off a diagnosis for a dozen years or so just by using cannabis.
Mm. And then by chance did they put her on really hardcore MS medication that made her hair fall out? Or
No. But some of the forms of MS are like the relapsing remitting types. There's some really good expensive drugs that actually stop the progression of disease. So, you know, cannabis is really good for spasticity and pain, but the doses aren't really enough to modify disease. So we're finding quite often that at the moment that the people with MS who really need it are those with primary progressive MS, and other ones who end up in a wheelchair and progressing to being a quadriplegic and that sort of thing. And in fact, that's what we had a patient with that we helped get the high THC oil approved for. She has sadly passed away in the last week or so, but she was bedbound and she was paralysed from the neck down, and on top of that, she had a stroke. So you know she was in a pretty poor state towards the end.
And how close to the end did that high THC oil get to her?
Well, we didn't get it to her legally. That's the thing that fell over, as I spoke earlier about the Cannabis. But she ended up swapping over to the other product that was available in the interim. But our target for high THC products would be those in the palliative care scenarios, just because of the reluctance of prescribers at the moment. We did actually have an interesting factoid come out of the GP's conference in Christchurch. We surveyed doctors for what their thoughts were on the psychoactivity of balanced products that have an equal amount of THC and CBD. And the average score they were giving was about 5.5 out of 10, when in reality during the clinical trials it's more like a 1 out of 10. So there's a big perception that we need to do some re-education on with the doctors in the next year or so about higher CBD and balanced products.
People don't like the term re-education, I don't think. But in the case of cannabis, I think it's kind of done because we've been miseducated for quite so long about the plant, what it can do, and that kind of thing. And one thought that occurred to me a while ago was the analysis and the progression of research into cannabis being retarded by 90 years of prohibition. So essentially, it's an illegal drug, you can't study it, and that kind of thing. Or maybe things being held back in the technology sector, because a lot of the things that we're using today, even when it comes to cannabis products and things like that, can be aided by the use of technology, advanced vaporizers and medical treatment products and things of this nature, right? These things are starting to be invented now, but they could have been started to be invented like 90 years ago. How far behind the times are we, and how much do we not know about the potential uses of this plant and potential technological advancement that we could get out of it?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. There's a raft of preclinical studies, whether it's in the lab dish or in animals, that say it's awesome for all of these things, but to go to the phase 3, which is that clinical certainty, And that's where some of the activists are doing a bit of a disservice about how the medical system works. Is on paper it looks really good for a whole lot of things, but no one's actually taken it all the way through human clinical trials and proven it. Just like I think CBD's been linked to improved bone density, which sounds awesome, but no one's gone and put 2,000 elderly women through it and actually measured it all and quantified it. And that's what we've missed out on with the prohibition for so long. Is we've got all of this lab dish stuff that says it's really good, and no one's really willing to take it all the way to hand on heart prove that it works because of the costs involved and the prohibition side of the argument.
So there's prohibition and it's cost prohibitive.
Yeah, but it's cost prohibitive because of prohibition. So, even when you develop a product like Cannadates, they must have sunk $100 million into research, and now they've got to recoup all of that, and I'm sure they haven't yet, because they've only been slowly introducing it to markets, and because of the costs, no one can afford the stuff anyway. So it's very much a 1%ers medicine at the moment. And, we're trying to get it down to, we want it to be affordable for 80 to 90%.
I personally believe it should be able to be grown by yourself, if nobody's hurting anybody or stealing anything or whatever, and you're just using it for your own personal use, medical or otherwise. I think that should be okay, personally.
Yeah, the political situation at the moment is that's just not considered medical. So anyone who wants to grow their own needs to really put their focus on the referendum and ignore the government medical cannabis bill.
Do you think that referendum's going to be worded right? Because there's a whole bunch of very big questions about the referendum that myself and a number of other party members have. Is that if you phrase a question correctly, should cannabis be legal for New Zealanders to use and grow without regulation or whatever the question might be, it's all up in the air right now. And my big fear, personally, is that it'll be a I don't quite understand the question type thing, so that about maybe 20% of people won't even quite understand the question of it, like it'll have a double negative in it or some BS like that to throw off the population vote a little bit. I get suspicious.
Well, it's Andrew Little's baby, is my understanding, and of the Labour MPs, he's one of the ones who's actually shining in his current role. So I have a bit more confidence in him. But there's also, some pressure groups that are being set up. Like there's a Cannabis Referendum Coalition. I think they're having an event in November, and there's also Start the Conversation. So I'm hoping with a bit of constructive lobbying that they'll be able to try and steer the questions in the right way. But it's really up to a few key MPs that have got an interest in the issue to make sure that it's not screwed up. So, talk to Chloe Swarbrick, talk to Andrew Little, try and figure out who's the point man in National, because I don't think they have one on these issues at the moment. But New Zealand First is, I just wouldn't bother with them.
Personally, I find that a little bit ironic about New Zealand First, considering the amount of their voters' grey power and so on and so forth, that in the golden years of their life could actually really be helped by cannabis products.
Yeah, there's a huge growing market for the skin creams at the moment. So people who don't like the idea of taking a fairly foul-tasting oil, or smoking it. People are making skin creams up the wazoo now, and a whole lot of arthritic elderly patients are using it. So it certainly is a growing portion of the market. And as the research goes forward, we might actually find some, clinically trialled CBD skin gels and creams that'll be useful.
One can only hope. But in the meantime, of course, there are very compassionate green fairies out there. But I also want to mention to people as well that there are people masquerading as green fairies who want to steal your money and stand over you. All right, this happened to our latest party member, Richard Boswell, when he tried to get some cannabis for his medical conditions, and the person pulled a knife on him. So be careful, is what we've got to say. It ain't legal yet. People ain't bound by regulations when they're committing a crime, but they are when they're operating a business.
we've been contacted by other people that have had something fairly similar, where they've been sold a bag of green plant material and they open it up and it's little nodules off a cactus plant or something silly like that. So there is a lot of that going on, and there's a lot more people that say they're green fairies, but really they're just dealers who want a small but consistent chain of supply. And there's green fairies who do it for free or compassionate pricing, and then there's those that are just charging the full market rates. So it's, there's varying degrees of competency as well with the level of extractions, purging butane and things like that. So there's I'd say the better people are trying to transition to rosin and extraction methods like that, where it's foolproof as far as safety goes.
Okay. Well, just the final minutes of it here. Those people who can't get cannabis right now, or have cannabis and don't know how to turn it into a product, into a cream or something like that, what would you let them know?
Magic butter machine. Just infuse it into a food oil, and that's really as safe as houses as far as extractions go. When I had my court appearance, where I got a diversion, I actually met a guy who was a bit of a crispy critter. And he wasn't the smartest cookie in the shed, and he had a few teeth missing, and he had scars all over his hands and face. And that was because he was purging butane in a caravan with the door closed, and a spark ignited the whole lot, and he was thrown out the door like in a cartoon. So it really goes down to the safety and competency of knowing what you're doing. So, you shouldn't be handling butane and ISO unless you really know what you're doing. This is why we just recommend people infuse it into a butter or a coconut oil with the magic butter machine.
Yeah, indeed. If you've got some leaf matter or some cannabis roots or something like that, it's very, very difficult to get the dirt off the cannabis roots, folks. But once you do, if you put that root structure and everything like that in just like a slow cooker with like a litre of coconut oil, just organic coconut oil, you simmer that overnight, you pour it out, you get any of the matter off it or whatever, and essentially it's a solid soap that just melts at room temperature. So you just break off a chunk, rub it on your hands if you've got arthritis or if you've got skin problems and things like that. It starts to clear them right up. A friend of mine had an infection in his hand from a phoenix palm, and he put some of that oil on it and it cleared right up within 24 hours pretty much, all the infection and everything. So it's
So cannabis roots is a bit interesting because it doesn't actually have much in the way of cannabinoids in it, but it's got a compound fredolin, I think it's pronounced, and that's actually a completely different type of chemical, but it's also an anti-inflammatory, much like CBD. So there's a lot of miseducation out there about these root balms being loaded with CBD when they're really not.
And there's the old adage of near enough's good enough, and if it works, it works, and you can't argue with results.
Yeah. We're trying to move beyond anecdotes, though. So
that's true, yeah. But thanks to Prohibition, it's the best we've got now.
Yeah. What can you do? Change.
All right. Thank you very much, Shane from MCANZ. Would you be able to do, please, a little bit of self-promotion for yourself, your organisation? Are there any needs, donations, products you want people to purchase, or anything of that nature you'd like to promote? Please go ahead.
Okay, we've actually got hoodies for sale. You can find them on our website, and we've sold 70 or 80 of them so far, and we're keen to sell some more. But what we really need is a large group of people to have low-level donations, like $1 or $2 a week. So we have a scheme at the moment. If you commit to $2 a week, it'll actually set up as an HP, and we'll send you a T-shirt and some goodies and our policy booklet and so on and so forth. But you can imagine if we had 50 to 100 people chip in $2 a week, it'd really help with our advocacy and getting to the next medical conferences for the GPs and that sort of thing.
So how can people contribute? What's the website there?
www.mcanz.org.nz, and that'll go to our website, and there's a donate page on there with all the details. You can do it through Give a Little. If you're a Spark employee, they'll actually double your donations. And, of course, we just got regular bank transfers as well.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I do want to make an interesting point on that note as well. Just on my side of things, being a talk radio show host and everything like that for 10 years, making sure that people's voices get heard. I just received a $100 US donation today into my PayPal, and I was so grateful because it means I can pay my rent this week. And so I want to remind folks that whatever donations and things that you do to to help people out because they're doing the right thing, you believe in them, you know that there's something worth supporting, you have no idea how important those regular contributions are. If you're making $1 a week, $1 a month, $100 a month, $25 a week, those kind of contributions often make the difference between can an activist do their job of protecting the country from scumbaggery and leading it into a brighter, more sustainable... I don't like that buzzword sustainable, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. It gets overused all the time. Shall we say a freer, more just society that is based upon reason and compassion as opposed to prejudice and scumbaggery. That would be nice. And that's what all the activists I've met over the years do. So support them, support the Legalise Cannabis Party, and of course support Shane Brun here. I'm Vinny Eastwood from the All Camps podcast. This is episode number 9. You can check us out at alcp.org.nz and facebook.com/Aotearoa LCP. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good night. Or good day, wherever the hell you're watching this from. Goodbye, everyone.